A millionaire paid $10,000 to take his maid to the ball. She arrived like a goddess and shocked him. Secrets came to light and their lives changed forever. A story that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like and comment where you are watching from. The December sun beat down on the windows of the mansion in the gardens when Sarah Johnson finished polishing the last piece of the French china cabinet. Her hands, calloused from years of hard work, glided carefully over each gleaming surface, reflecting her fragmented image in dozens of small mirrors at EC. At 32, she maintained the upright posture she learned from her mother, even after 8 hours of cleaning the 3 floors of the most luxurious property she had ever worked in. Sarah was of medium height, with dark brown hair always tied in a discreet bun, and honey-colored eyes that seemed to capture every detail around her. Her tan skin had the golden hue of someone born under the sun of the countryside in Springfield, where she grew up running among the coffee trees on her grandfather's farm. Even wearing the simple work uniform, black pants, and an impeccably ironed white blouse, there was a natural elegance about her that did not go unnoticed. The mansion where she had worked for 2 years was a palatial estate from the early 20th century, renovated with all the refinement that money could buy. High ceilings, check crystal chandeliers, period furniture harmoniously mixed with contemporary pieces designed by famous designers. The constant aroma of French lavender permeated every room, coming from the imported sachets that the former owner of the house had scattered throughout the property before passing away, leaving everything to her only son. Richard Mendonça observed Sarah from the office door, leaning against the solid wood frame. At 38, he had the typical appearance of New York's elite, always combed black hair, a clean-shaven face, tailored suits that cost more than most people's annual salaries. His blue-grey eyes, a legacy from his Italian grandmother, had an intensity that intimidated business rivals, but softened when he watched Sarah working. Heir to a real estate empire built by his father over 4 decades, Richard took over the business at 25, multiplying the family fortune through strategic investments in New York and the surrounding areas. His routine was filled with meetings in glass-walled offices on Park Avenue, lunches at the Four Seasons, and charity dinners where the same faces repeated in a social dance that he was beginning to find tedious. "Sarah," his voice echoed through the main hall, making her look up. "Can you come to my office? I need to talk to you." She slightly furrowed her brows, putting the cleaning cloth away in her apron. In 2 years of work, Richard had always been polite and respectful, but he rarely asked to talk beyond basic instructions about the house. Their interactions were limited to cordial greetings when he arrived or left, and the discreet compliments he made about how she kept everything impeccable. The office was on the 2nd floor, a spacious room with mahogany bookshelves filled with books on economics and architecture, as well as some classics of Brazilian literature that seemed more decorative than read. A mirrored glass coffee table separated 2 Italian leather armchairs, where Richard invited her to sit. "You know, Sarah, in 2 years you have transformed this house," he began, crossing his hands. "My mother always said that a house only becomes a home when there is someone who truly cares for it." Sarah nodded politely, but her natural curiosity made her wonder where this conversation was headed. She had learned to read people during the years caring for her own mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's. The disease taught her to interpret gestures, tones of voice, and subtle expressions that revealed hidden intentions. "For the past 3 weeks, I've been receiving calls about the charity gala of the Cultural Foundation of New York," Richard continued, standing up to fetch something from the desk drawer. "It's the most important charity event of the year in the city. Business people, politicians, artists, everyone will be there." Sarah remained silent, watching him pull out a heavy golden envelope, the kind used for high society wedding invitations. "I need a companion," he said, extending the envelope. "Someone I trust, who has no ulterior motives, who is authentic." She carefully took the envelope, feeling the texture of the expensive paper between her fingers. Upon opening it, she found an invitation printed in golden letters, and alongside it, 10 crisp $100 bills. $10,000 to buy a dress, shoes, go to the hairdresser. "Whatever is necessary," Richard explained, noticing the shock in her eyes. "The event is in 3 weeks. Sarah stared at the money, more than she earned in 2 months of work. Her rational mind knew she should accept. She needed the money to pay the installments on the apartment in Southside where she lived with her 8-year-old daughter, Emily. But something in her instinct made her hesitate. "Why me?" she asked directly, a characteristic of hers that disarmed people. "You must know dozens of women who would be honored with an invitation like this." Richard smiled for the first time in the conversation, admiring her frankness. "Exactly because of that I chose you, Sarah, because you asked that question." She slowly stood up, putting the envelope in the small bag she carried. "Can I think about it?" "Of course, but don't take too long. We need time for preparations." Walking down Augusta Street towards the subway, Sarah felt the weight of the envelope in her bag like a stone. The typical hustle and bustle of a late afternoon in New York, rushed executives, street vendors shouting their goods, the smell of pastries and soda mixed with the exhaust of buses, contrasted with the silent and fragrant universe of the mansion where she worked. On the crowded train, heading to the South Side, she reflected on the last 2 years, after the tumultuous separation from her husband, which left her with doubts and, with a small daughter to raise, Sarah had worked as a cleaner in 3 different houses, in addition to doing extra cleaning jobs on weekends. The job at the mansion in the Upper East Side had come through an agency and represented the financial stability she had been seeking. But there was something more. During those years caring for that vast space, Sarah had discovered an unexpected passion for organization and decoration. The small adjustments she made to the arrangement of objects, the discreet suggestions about maintenance that David always accepted, a natural intuition for creating cozy environments. Sometimes she found herself imagining what it would be like to organize events in those elegant halls. Arriving at her simple 4-story building, Sarah climbed the stairs, thinking about Emily. Her daughter was in the phase of questioning everything, a legacy of a sharp intelligence that her mother made a point of nurturing despite their financial struggles. How would she explain that invitation? How would she justify accepting or declining? "Mom!" Emily ran to hug her as soon as she opened the door. Slim, lively, with the same honey-colored eyes as her mother, the girl had a smile capable of making Sarah forget any fatigue. "How was school today, my love?" "Normal. Mrs. Thompson made lasagna. Do you want some?" Mrs. Thompson, the 70-year-old neighbor who took care of Emily while Sarah worked, was one of those essential figures life places in our path. A widow and former teacher, she had become a second grandmother to the girl. During the simple dinner, rice, black beans, grilled chicken and salad, Sarah watched her daughter recount the details of her day, but her mind kept drifting back to the envelope. $10,000 could resolve many issues, but it also represented uncharted territory. That night, after putting Emily to bed, Sarah sat on the small balcony of the apartment, looking at the city lights. New York stretched infinitely before her, a metropolis where dreams and disillusionments walked side by side down the same streets. For the first time in years, she felt a door opening to something completely new. The golden invitation lay on the kitchen table, gleaming under the fluorescent light like a promise of change. Sarah Johnson, cleaner, single mother, discreet dreamer, had no idea that those $10,000 and an invitation to a gala were about to completely transform her life. Chapter 2. The next morning, Sarah woke to the familiar sound of the alarm clock at 5:30. The same routine: quick shower, black coffee, 2 slices of bread with butter shared with Emily, who grumbled sleepily before getting ready for school. But this time there was a different energy in the air, an anticipation that made her heart race. "Mum, you seem strange today," Emily observed, nibbling on her bread while Sarah brushed her curly hair. "You seem, I don't know, different." Sarah smiled, impressed with her daughter's perception. "Maybe it's because something important might happen in our lives, my love." "Important like what?" "I don't know yet, but when I do, you'll be the first to know." She left Emily with Mrs. Thompson and headed to work with the golden envelope tucked in her bag, weighing like a secret. Throughout the subway and bus ride to the Upper East Side, she imagined different scenarios. What if it was a prank? What if David had other intentions? What if she simply couldn't adapt to that sophisticated world? Arriving at the mansion at 8 in the morning, she found David having coffee in the backyard, a space she had always admired. The area was an oasis amid the concrete of New York, century-old cherry trees, beds of white roses, a Portuguese stone fountain creating a soothing sound of flowing water, a white-painted wrought-iron table contrasted with the navy-blue cushions of the chairs. "Good morning, Sarah," he greeted, lifting his eyes from the New York Times open to the business section. "Have you decided about the invitation?" She took a deep breath. All night she had weighed the pros and cons, mentally conversing with her late mother, imagining what the strong woman who had raised her would do in the same situation. "I accept," she said simply, pulling the envelope from her bag, "but with one condition." David raised his eyebrows, intrigued. He was not used to conditions from employees, but there was something in Sarah's demeanor that inspired respect. "I want to understand exactly what you expect from me that night. I won't pretend to be someone I'm not, and I won't do anything that makes me uncomfortable." He closed the newspaper and looked at her intently. Sarah stood beside the table, her usual upright posture, but there was a new firmness in her gaze. The work uniform did not diminish her natural dignity. "Sarah, please sit down," he requested, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Let me explain better." She hesitated for a moment. She had never sat at the table with her boss, but eventually accepted the invitation. "Every year I have to attend this gala. It's important for business, to maintain contacts, to show support for the city's charitable causes," David began, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup for her. "In recent years, I've always brought, let's say, companions who saw the event as an opportunity to meet influential people, to appear in social columns, to gain some advantage." Sarah accepted the coffee, inhaling the strong, rich aroma, much better than the instant coffee she drank at home. "This year, I want to be myself, to bring someone who is authentic, who isn't playing a role," he continued, "someone who allows me to be authentic too." "But why me? We barely know each other." David smiled, stirring the sugar in his coffee. "Sarah, in 2 years you've never asked me for anything besides your salary. You've never gossiped about my personal life, never tried to impress important visitors, never acted differently when politicians or business people came here for meetings. You simply do your job with a dedication that transforms this place." She drank the coffee in silence, processing his words. "Moreover," David added, "you have something." Sarah felt her face warm slightly. She didn't know he noticed those details. "So what exactly do you expect from me at the gala?" "To be yourself, to talk to people without pretending to be someone you're not, to accompany me during the event as a friend." The word friend hung in the air between them. Sarah had never thought of David as a friend. The social difference between them always seemed insurmountable, but there was something sincere in the way he spoke. "And what about the $10,000? It's yours, regardless of anything. Consider it a bonus for the excellent work over the last 2 years, he replied. But if you agree to accompany me, I'd like you to use that money to feel comfortable at the event. A nice dress, a good hairstylist, whatever makes you feel confident. Sarah finished her coffee and gently placed the cup on the saucer. Her hands were steady, but her heart raced. I accept, she finally said, but you need to know that I don't know anything about social etiquette, expensive wines, or how to talk to millionaires. Great, then let's learn together. David stood up and walked to a small side table in the garden, from which he retrieved a brown leather planner. I have some contacts who can help. A friend of my mother's who taught etiquette, an exceptional hairstylist on Park Avenue, a store in the shopping district where I buy gifts for corporate events. As he wrote down names and phone numbers on a letterhead, Sarah observed his precise movements. David had elegant hands, well-groomed nails, a discreet Swiss watch that probably cost more than a compact car. But there were also small human details. An almost imperceptible scar on his index finger, the habit of running his fingers through his hair when he thought, the way his eyes lit up when he spoke about something that truly mattered. Sarah, can I ask a personal question? She nodded, curious. Why have you never talked about your life, your dreams, your plans? In 2 years I only know that you have a daughter and that you're separated. The question caught her off guard. Sarah had built clear barriers between her personal and professional life, a protection learned after bad experiences in previous jobs. Because I learned that the less employers know about our lives, the better, she replied honestly. It avoids problems, misunderstandings, and protections. Protections against what? Sarah hesitated, but something in David's sincere tone encouraged her to continue. Against judgments. Against those who think a single mother is synonymous with an available woman. Against those who confuse education with romantic interest. Against those who use our financial needs as bargaining chips. The silence that followed was not awkward but reflective. David seemed to process every word. I understand, he finally said, and I assure you that none of that will happen here. You have my word. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. She had learned to distrust easy promises, but something in David's expression reassured her. Then let's do this, she said, extending her hand for a formal handshake. Partners for one night. David smiled and shook her hand. Partners for one night. As Sarah resumed her cleaning activities, a new energy pulsed through the mansion. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of something beyond mere survival. 3 weeks to transform into a sophisticated version of herself. To step into a world she had always observed from afar. The sound of the fountain in the garden seemed different that morning, not melancholic, but promising. As if even the water knew that important changes were coming. Chapter 3. 2 days later, Sarah found herself at the door of an elegant building on the Upper West Side, holding a paper with the address David had written down. Helen Carter Institute of Etiquette and Protocol, read the golden sign at the entrance. Her stomach churned with nerves as she watched others coming and going. Well-dressed women, men in suits, all seeming to belong naturally to that sophisticated environment. Helen Carter was a lady in her 60s, with impeccably styled white hair in a low chignon, wearing a beige linen suit that cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. Her piercing blue eyes were intense, but not hostile, and she had the kind of posture that only decades of refined education can produce. "So you're the Sarah that David told me about," said Helen, studying her from head to toe without disguise. "Interesting." The comment made Sarah uncomfortable, but she kept her chin up. "Interesting how, ma'am?" Helen smiled for the first time. "Because you look me in the eye when you speak. Half the people who come to my classes are here wanting to learn how to impress others. You seem to just want to avoid looking foolish." "That's exactly it," Sarah admitted, relaxing slightly. The classroom was a cozy environment, decorated like an elegant living room. Navy blue velvet sofas, low tables made of fine wood, and a sideboard displaying an impressive collection of fine china and glassware. On the walls, black and white, photographs showed Helen with politicians, artists, and famous business people over the years. "Let's start with the basics," Helen announced, serving coffee in French porcelain cups. "How would you greet the mayor of the city?" Sarah hesitated. "Good morning, Mr. Mayor." "Not wrong, but let's refine it." "Good evening, Mayor Smith. It's an honor to meet you," Helen demonstrated, extending her hand firmly. "Always use the person's name when you know it, and be specific about the pleasure of the encounter." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah learned more about social protocol than she ever imagined existed. How to hold a wine glass by the stem, never by the bowl. How to greet different authorities. Politicians, business people, artists had slightly different approaches. How to participate in group conversations without dominating. "Now let's talk about something more important than any etiquette rule," Helen said, sitting next to Sarah on the sofa. "Authenticity." "What do you mean?" "Sarah, you can memorize all the protocols in the world, but if you're not genuine, people will notice immediately. True elegance comes from confidence in who you are, not from trying to be someone else." The words resonated deeply. Sarah thought of all the times she had felt inferior for not knowing social codes, for not being able to distinguish an expensive wine from a cheap one, for wearing simple clothes while others flaunted designer brands. "But how can I have confidence in a world that isn't mine?" Helen stood up and went to a shelf, pulling out an old leather-bound book. "This is a book about the history of traditional families in New York. Do you know what I discovered while studying these stories? That most of these aristocratic families were made up of poor immigrants who arrived in America 150 years ago." Sarah flipped through the pages, looking at old photographs of simple people who became prosperous farmers, industrialists, merchants. "David's grandfather, for example," Helen continued, "came from Italy in 1920 without speaking English. He worked as a mason before starting to build affordable housing. The family tradition is less than a century old." The revelation was liberating. For years, Sarah had assumed there was an insurmountable barrier between her and people like David, as if they were different species. Discovering that the differences were more recent and less fundamental changed her perspective. "So, what really matters?" she asked. "Curiosity, education, respect for others and for yourself. The rest are just social conventions that any intelligent person can learn." The next day, Sarah was at the shops at Columbus Circle, one of the most upscale malls in New York, holding a card for a boutique that David had recommended. The atmosphere was intimidating. Pristine displays, impeccably dressed salespeople, customers moving effortlessly among brands she only knew from magazines. The Essence Boutique occupied a spacious area on the second floor, with dresses displayed like works of art. Sarah was greeted by a blonde saleswoman in her 30s, perfectly made up, who quickly assessed her from head to toe with a professional smile. "How can I help you?" "I need a dress for the charity gala of the Cultural Foundation of New York," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. The saleswoman's expression subtly changed. "Oh, I see. And what would your price range be?" Before Sarah could respond, a familiar voice made her freeze. "Sarah! Sarah Johnson!" She turned slowly, her heart sinking. In front of her was Mark, her ex-brother-in-law, brother of her ex-husband, who had turned her separation into a hell of gossip and judgment. Mark was the store manager, impeccably dressed in a grey suit, hair slicked back, the same fake smile she remembered from family barbecues. "What a surprise to see you here," he said. his tone laden with barely concealed irony. Looking for something special? Sarah felt all her insecurities flooding back at once. Mark knew her story, knew about her financial struggles, about the 3 jobs she had to juggle after the separation. Her presence there, in that expensive store, looking for an evening gown, must have seemed completely out of place. "A dress for an event," she replied simply, trying to keep her voice steady. "What kind of event?" he pressed, clearly enjoying her discomfort. "I didn't know you attended that kind of occasion." The saleswoman watched the interaction with barely concealed interest, clearly sensing the tension. "The charity gala of the Cultural Foundation of New York," Sarah replied, lifting her chin. Helen's lessons echoed in her mind: confidence, authenticity, respect for herself. Mark laughed openly. "Seriously? And who's going to pay for that fancy dress? Because as far as I know, you still work as—" "Excuse me," a male voice interrupted. David appeared next to Sarah, elegant in a navy suit, with the ease of someone who had frequented that environment for decades. "Sorry for the delay, Sarah. The traffic on Fifth Avenue was impossible." Sarah looked at him in surprise. They hadn't arranged to meet there. "Mark Johnson, right?" David extended his hand to the ex-brother-in-law, who visibly paled. "David Mendonça. We did some business a few years ago, housing project in Newark. How are you?" Mark shook the offered hand, clearly flustered. "Mr. Mendonça. What a surprise. I didn't know you two knew each other." "Sarah is a very special person," David said, placing his hand lightly on her back, in a protective gesture. "We're here to choose something suitable for the gala. Do you have any options in the 5,000 range?" The figure made Mark choke slightly. The saleswoman, who until then had seemed reluctant to help, immediately perked up. "Of course, we have wonderful pieces in that range. Please follow me." As they followed the saleswoman, David whispered to Sarah, "Sorry for the interruption. I saw you arriving when I was leaving a meeting here at the mall. You looked like you needed support." Sarah looked at him gratefully. "How did you know?" "Body language and intuition." For the next hour, Sarah tried on dresses that were more beautiful than any outfit she had ever worn. Navy, elegant black, sophisticated burgundy. Each piece transformed her, revealing a version of herself she didn't know existed. The chosen dress was teal, with a cut that accentuated her silhouette without being vulgar. The fabric flowed like water as she walked, and the color made her honey-colored eyes shine in a special way. "Perfect," David said when she stepped out of the fitting room. "You look stunning." Sarah looked at herself in the 3-way mirror and barely recognized the woman reflected back. She wasn't someone else, it was herself, just revealed in a new way. Mark, who had been watching everything in silence, finally approached when David went to pay for the dress. "Sarah, do you know what you're getting into?" he whispered. "Men like him don't do anything for free." She looked him directly in the eye. "Mark, you judged me when I was at my lowest, spread gossip about me in the family, and now you want to give me advice. Thank you, but I will trust my own judgment." The response left him speechless. Sarah had changed, and it wasn't just because of the expensive dress. Leaving the store with the elegant bag in her hands, Sarah felt a mix of relief and excitement. The encounter with Mark had been an unexpected test, and she had passed. More importantly, David had shown up at the exact moment she needed him, without her asking for help. "Why did you do that?" she asked as they walked through the mall. "Because I recognize a setup when I see one," he replied. "And because you didn't deserve to go through this alone." Sarah smiled, feeling for the first time that maybe, just maybe, that partnership for one night could turn into something deeper, a true friendship based on mutual respect and trust. Chapter 4. The beauty salon, elegance in the Upper East Side, was a temple of feminine sophistication. Sarah had never stepped into a place like that. Carrara marble floors, white leather armchairs, mirrors illuminated by lights that seemed straight out of a movie, and a subtle aroma of essential oils that immediately relaxed any tension. The ambient sound was a subtle mix of classical piano and low conversations from clients who clearly belonged to New York's elite. Sarah Johnson? A woman in her 40s, with platinum blonde hair cut in a modern bob, approached with a warm smile. "I'm Lisa Thompson, your hairstylist today. Mr. David personally called to schedule your appointment." Sarah felt a pang of surprise. David had called personally. That meant he was more involved in the preparations than he had initially shown. Lisa guided her to a chair in front of a generously proportioned mirror, where Sarah could observe her reflection under unforgivingly bright lighting. Her natural brown hair, always tied up in practical buns, was dry from overwork and lack of special care. Her skin, although naturally beautiful, showed signs of accumulated fatigue. "So, tell me about the event," Lisa asked, running her fingers through Sarah's hair to assess the texture. "And tell me about yourself too. I always like to know the person before deciding what we're going to do." Sarah hesitated. She was used to being invisible, to not talking about herself. But something in the welcoming atmosphere and Lisa's sincerity encouraged her. "I'm going to the charity gala of the Cultural Foundation of New York with my employer," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I've worked as a housekeeper in his home for 2 years. Lisa stopped examining her hair and looked at her through the mirror. "And how do you feel about that?" "Nervous, excited, confused," Sarah admitted. "It's a completely new world for me." "I completely understand," Lisa smiled, resuming her hair assessment. "You know, Sarah, I've been working here for 15 years. I've styled many women for important events, and I can tell you one thing: the most elegant ones are not necessarily those who were born rich. They are the ones who have something special inside," she said, lightly touching her chest. Lisa began her work by applying a blend of nourishing oils that made Sarah's hair shine immediately. While they waited for the treatment to take effect, she was taken to have her nails done by a young and chatty manicurist named Jessica, who immediately put her at ease. "First time here?" Jessica asked, starting to work on Sarah's dry cuticles. "First time in any place like this," Sarah confessed. "That's great. I love first times. It means we're going to make you look beautiful in a way you've never seen before." During the moisturizing and polishing process, a pink nude that Jessica chose to match the teal dress, Sarah gradually relaxed. The conversations around her were about travel, children, work, relationships, normal women talking about normal life, just in a more luxurious setting. When she returned to Lisa, the transformation truly began. The cut was subtle, yet dramatic, a few centimeters taken off for movement, layers that created natural volume, a side fringe that softened her facial features. "Now let's move on to the color," Lisa announced. "I thought about some discreet golden highlights to enhance your eyes, nothing over the top, just to add depth." Sarah watched fascinated as the process unfolded in the mirrors around her. Other clients were receiving similar treatments, some for weddings, others for corporate events, an elegant lady preparing for her 80th birthday. There was a silent sisterhood among all the women there, an understanding that those moments were about more than appearance. They were about confidence, about feeling special. During the application of the highlights, Lisa began to chat casually. Mr. David seemed very considerate when making the reservation. He made sure to explain that you were preparing for an important event and wanted the best treatment possible. Sarah felt her face heat up. "He said that?" "He did, and more. He mentioned that you are a very special person who has worked with exceptional dedication for 2 years, and that he wanted you to feel like a princess for one night." The words made Sarah swallow hard. David had taken the trouble to call personally, explain the situation, and ensure she received special attention. This went far beyond professional courtesy. "Lisa, can I ask you a question?" Sarah said after a moment. "Of course. Do you think it's normal for an employer to get so involved in the personal details of an employee?" Lisa paused, applying the product, and looked at her through the mirror with a thoughtful expression. "Sarah, in 15 years here, I've received hundreds of calls from husbands scheduling appointments for their wives, children taking care of their mothers, boyfriends planning surprises, but calls from employers for employees, I can count them on one hand." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. "And what does that mean?" "It can mean several things. Maybe he's just a very kind person. Maybe he feels responsible for you being comfortable at the event, or maybe—" Lisa paused significantly. "He sees you in a way different from what you imagine." The rest of the treatment passed in contemplative silence. Sarah processed. As words of Sarah while observing her transformation in the mirror, the golden highlights were subtle, but they made a noticeable difference, creating depth and brightness. The cut framed her face in a way that accentuated her best features. When it was time for the final styling, Sarah could hardly recognize herself. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, shiny and with natural movement. Her face looked more defined, her eyes more expressive. "Oh my God," she murmured, lightly touching her hair. "And we haven't even started on the makeup," smiled the makeup artist who approached. "I'm Fernanda. We're going to create something elegant yet natural for you." The makeup was an artistic process. Fernanda worked with neutral colors that enhanced Sarah's natural beauty without creating an artificial mask, foundation that evened out her skin tone, concealer that hid small imperfections, a rosy blush that brought life to her cheeks. "Your eyes are beautiful," Fernanda commented while applying earthy-toned eyeshadows. "We'll just enhance them, creating depth without overdoing it." The final result was stunning. Sarah looked in the mirror and saw a sophisticated version of herself, not a different person, but her own self at her best. Her honey-colored eyes appeared larger and more expressive, her skin radiant, and her lips had a natural rosy tint that perfectly matched the ensemble. "Ready for a photo?" asked Emily, grabbing her phone. Sarah posed shyly, still getting used to her new image. When she saw the photo, she had difficulty believing it was her. Leaving the salon, she received dozens of admiring glances on the street. Men turned their heads, women offered discreet compliments, and even a small child commented to her mother that she was very pretty. On the way home, Sarah stopped at a shoe store in Central Park and chose medium-heeled golden sandals that would complement her dress. She also bought a small black handbag, discreet pearl earrings, and a light perfume. Arriving at the apartment, Emily greeted her with wide eyes. "Mom, you look different. You're beautiful." "Thank you, my love," Sarah smiled, hugging her daughter. "Is it for that important event you mentioned?" "Yes, it is." Emily studied her with the seriousness characteristic of her 8 years. "Mom, you look genuinely happy. I haven't seen you like this in a long time." That night, after Emily fell asleep, Sarah stood for a long time in front of the bathroom mirror. The physical transformation was evident, but something deeper was happening. For the first time in years, she felt beautiful. Not just presentable or acceptable, but genuinely attractive. The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was David. "Sarah, how was the salon?" "It was transformative," she replied honestly. "I'm glad. The car will pick you up at 7 on Friday. The event starts at 8, but I like to arrive on time." "David," she hesitated, "can I ask why you personally called the salon?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Because I wanted to make sure you received the best treatment possible. You deserve it." The simplicity and sincerity of the response touched her deeply. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. See you on Friday, Sarah." Lying in bed, Sarah looked at the dress hanging in the closet, the new shoes by the bed, the small handbag on the dresser. In less than 2 weeks, her life had taken a completely unexpected turn. But there was one question she couldn't shake: what truly motivated David Johnson? And more importantly, what she was beginning to feel for him was gratitude, or something more dangerous. Chapter 5. Friday arrived with a typical summer rain that turned the streets into shining mirrors under the city lights. Sarah stood in front of the bedroom mirror, wearing the teal ensemble for the first time, the dress that fit her body perfectly, the golden sandals that elongated her legs, the pearl earrings that delicately framed her face. Her hair, still styled from the salon, shone under the yellow light of the modest room. Emily sat on the bed, watching her mother with genuine admiration. "Mom, you look like a soap opera actress," the girl said, fidgeting nervously, a trait Sarah recognized as hereditary. "And do you think that's good or bad?" Sarah asked, trying to hide her own anxiety while applying the light perfume behind her ears. "It's very good, but it's also kind of scary," Emily replied with the brutal honesty of children. "You're not going to change after this party, are you?" The question hit Sarah like a punch in the stomach. She knelt before her daughter, holding her small hands. "My love, I can wear beautiful clothes, go to elegant places, meet different people, but I will always be your mother. Nothing in the world will change that." Emily nodded, but there was a worry in her eyes that Sarah knew well, the fear of abandonment stemming from her parents' tumultuous separation. "What if you like that world more than ours?" Sarah felt her eyes welling up. "Emily, our world is you and me, our home, our bedtime stories, our walks in the park. That doesn't fit into any dress, no matter how expensive it is." The doorbell rang precisely at 7 o'clock. Sarah stood up, checked herself in the mirror one last time, grabbed the small handbag where she had kept only the essentials: phone, lipstick, a bit of money, and her ID. When she opened the door, she found a uniformed driver, a middle-aged black man with impeccable posture and a gentle smile. "Good evening, Ms. Sarah. I'm Antonio, Mr. David's driver. The car is waiting." Sarah looked out the window and saw a black Mercedes-Benz parked in front of the building, drawing the attention of curious neighbors peeking discreetly from their windows. It was the first time a car of that caliber had stopped on the modest street where she lived. "Goodbye, Mom. Good luck," Emily said, hugging her tightly. "Goodbye, sweetheart. Mrs. Thompson will stay here with you, and I'll be back before midnight like Cinderella." Sarah smiled, trying to keep the tone light. The car was more luxurious inside than she had imagined. Beige leather seats, quiet air conditioning, a glass partition separating the passengers from the driver. Antonio politely offered water and asked if the temperature was comfortable. "First time at an event like this?" he asked, while navigating the traffic in the south side towards downtown. "Yes, it is. And it's more than evident, isn't it?" Sarah laughed nervously. "Actually, no. You have a natural elegance that many people attending these events lack," Antonio replied, observing her through the rearview mirror. "I've worked for Mr. David for 8 years. I've taken many of his dates to similar events. Most spent more time worrying about appearances than being genuine." The observation intrigued Sarah. "Does he often take different dates?" "He used to," Antonio corrected. "In the last 2 years, he hardly went out to social events, and when he did, he went alone. This is the first time in a long time that he shows interest in impressing someone." Antonio's words echoed in Sarah's mind for the rest of the ride. What exactly was happening? Why had she, an employee, sparked this special interest? The Metropolitan Opera House loomed majestically in the New York night, its golden lights reflecting in the puddles from the rain that had just stopped. Luxury cars lined up to drop off their occupants at the main entrance, where a red carpet had been laid out and social media photographers captured the important guests. Sarah felt her heart race at the grandeur of the event. Women in designer gowns stepped out of imported cars. As if it were routine, men in tuxedos greeted each other with the familiarity of those who had mingled in such circles for decades. "You're going to do great," Antonio said, noticing her nervousness as they stopped in line. "Remember, confidence is the best jewel any woman can wear." When it was finally their turn, Antonio quickly got out to open the door for Sarah. She took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and stepped onto the red carpet with the natural elegance that Helena's lessons had only refined. David was waiting for her at the entrance of the theatre, and when he saw her, his expression changed completely. Dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, he was talking to a group of businessmen, but upon spotting her, he interrupted the conversation mid-sentence. "Sarah," he said, approaching with a genuine smile, "you look stunning." She felt her face heat up, but maintained her composure. "Thank you. You look very elegant too." David offered his arm and she accepted it, feeling the firmness of his muscles beneath the fine fabric of the tuxedo. Together, they walked down the marble staircase of the theatre towards the main hall. The atmosphere was breathtaking. The ornate 19th century ceiling had been adorned with suspended arrangements of white orchids, creating an almost celestial effect. Round tables covered with cream linen accommodated 8 people each, with fine china, crystal reflecting the light from the chandeliers, and centerpieces with scented candles. "Impressed?" David asked, observing her reaction. "It's like stepping into a fairy tale," Sarah admitted, her eyes scanning every detail of the environment. "Wait until you meet some people. Many have stories more interesting than any fairy tale." During the first hour, David carefully introduced her to various guests. Sarah applied Helena's lessons on greetings and conversation, discovering that her natural curiosity about people was an unexpected advantage. Instead of trying to impress with knowledge she didn't possess, she asked genuine questions and listened to the answers with real attention. It was during a conversation with the wife of a businessman in the food industry that the first unexpected encounter of the night occurred. "Sarah Johnson," a feminine voice made her turn around. Before her stood Jessica Carter, an elegant woman in her 50s, with grey hair styled in a sophisticated bun, wearing a classic black dress. Sarah recognized her immediately, and her heart raced. Jessica was the wife of one of the owners of St. Raphael Hospital, where Sarah had worked as a private caregiver 3 years earlier, during the final months of Margaret's life. "Ms. Jessica," Sarah smiled, extending her hand. "What a surprise to see you here." "The surprise is mine, dear. You look absolutely radiant," Jessica said, holding her hand with genuine affection. "How are you, and how is your daughter?" "We're well, thank you. Emily is 8 now, growing up too fast." David watched the interaction with curiosity, clearly intrigued by the familiarity between the 2 women. "Sarah," Jessica turned to David, "was an angel during the last months of my mother-in-law. Margaret had advanced Alzheimer's, was quite aggressive, but Sarah had a patience and kindness. She could calm my mother-in-law in a way that even family couldn't." Sarah felt her face heat up with the compliment, but also with the concern that her professional history might embarrass David. "She sang old songs to my mother-in-law," Jessica continued, "told stories, did her hair. Margaret passed away peacefully, holding Sarah's hand." There was an emotional silence. David looked at Sarah with a new expression, as if discovering aspects of her he hadn't imagined existed. "Sarah never told me about this work," he finally said. "Because there are things that don't fit on a resume," Sarah replied softly. "And because caring for people is about them, not about us." Jessica smiled approvingly. That's exactly why you were exceptional. Sarah, she continued, you know my husband and I have always said that if you ever needed anything, you could reach out to us. I remember, and I am very grateful. Well, it turns out we are expanding our social programs at the hospital. We need someone to coordinate a project for improving care for the elderly. Someone with real experience, not just theoretical. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. A job offer, right there at that party, from people. Sarah felt a mix of disbelief and excitement. Is this a serious offer? She asked, hardly daring to believe it. Completely serious. The salary would be 3 times what you currently earn with full benefits, and you could make a difference in the lives of hundreds of people. David remained silent, observing the conversation with complete attention. Sarah could sense his tension, even though he maintained a controlled expression. Can I think about it? Sarah asked. Of course, dear, but don't take too long. The project starts in 2 months. As Jessica stepped away to greet other acquaintances, Sarah and David found themselves alone for the first time that evening. You didn't tell me about this job at the hospital, he said, his voice carefully neutral. I didn't think it was relevant. It was 3 years ago, and it lasted only 6 months. Taking care of a lady with Alzheimer's for 6 months isn't relevant? Sarah studied him. There was something different in his tone, a tension she couldn't fully interpret. David, why do I feel like you're upset with me? He took a deep breath, running his hand through his hair in a gesture she recognized. I'm not upset. I'm impressed, and maybe a little worried. Worried about what? About the fact that you might be about to discover that you are worth much more than you realize, and when that happens... He paused, as if about to say something he shouldn't. And when that happens... What? David looked her in the eyes, and for the first time since they met, Sarah saw something vulnerable in his expression. When that happens, maybe you'll realize that you no longer need me. The confession hung between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to fully confront. Around them, the party continued in all its splendor, but for Sarah and David, the world had shrunk to that moment of unexpected honesty. Chapter 6. Dinner was served amidst conversations flowing between elegantly arranged tables in the hall. Sarah found herself sitting next to David at a table that included the mayor of New York, Mayor Smith, his wife, 2 tech entrepreneurs, and a couple of nationally recognized artists. The tasting menu began with a smoked salmon appetizer with capers, paired with a white wine that Sarah had learned to appreciate in small sips, as Helen had taught her. Sarah, David told me you have an interest in event planning, said the mayor, delicately cutting his fish. We always need creative people for our cultural events in the city. Sarah nearly choked on her wine. Had David mentioned her to the mayor? When? And why? Actually, Mr. Mayor, it's more of a developing interest, she replied carefully. I've been observing how well-organized events can transform experiences. Interesting perspective, Mayor Smith nodded. Can you elaborate? Sarah took a deep breath, recalling Helen's words about authenticity. Well, I've worked for 2 years in a house where meetings and small events often take place. I've noticed that the most important details aren't the most expensive. They're the ones that make people feel welcomed and special. The mayor's wife, Mrs. Smith, leaned in with interest. What kind of details? For example, knowing guests' dietary preferences in advance, creating environments where the acoustics allow for intimate conversations, even in large groups, positioning seating so that shy people don't feel exposed. Sarah became animated, talking about something she truly cared about. One of the tech entrepreneurs, Frank Anderson, stopped eating to pay attention. This is much more sophisticated than what most specialized companies offer. Do you have training in the field? No, just observation and Instinct, I would say. The best kind of qualification, commented Mrs. Smith. Mayor, do you remember the last event at the City Hall? We spent a fortune on a famous company, and it was completely impersonal. Mayor Smith nodded thoughtfully. Sarah, how about we schedule a conversation next week? We're planning a series of cultural events for the second half of the year, and your approach might be exactly what we need. Sarah felt David tense beside her, even though he kept a neutral expression. It was the second professional proposal of the night, and she could hardly process the implications. It would be an honor, Mr. Mayor, she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. The main course arrived. Filet mignon medallions with red wine sauce, accompanied by grilled asparagus and golden potatoes. The chosen wine was a full-bodied red that Sarah had learned to appreciate in small sips, savoring how the flavors complemented each other. During dessert, a Belgian chocolate mousse, decorated with berries. The conversation turned to more personal topics. Sarah, do you have family in New York? Asked the artist Claire Johnson. I have an 8-year-old daughter, Sarah replied with the smile that always appeared when she spoke of Emily. Oh, how lovely. I have a granddaughter the same age, said Mrs. Smith. How do you manage to balance work and motherhood? I won't lie. It's challenging, Sarah admitted, especially being a single mother. But Emily is my motivation for everything. She made me discover strengths I didn't know I had. There was a respectful silence at the table. Several of the women present were mothers, and they all understood the unique challenges of motherhood. And her father? Asked Claire, perhaps unaware that the question was delicate. Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second. He hasn't been part of our lives for a few years. It was a difficult but necessary decision. David, who had remained silent during this part of the conversation, discreetly placed his hand over hers for a moment, a brief but comforting gesture. Sometimes the most courageous decisions are the ones we make alone, said Frank Anderson, surprising the table with the depth of his comment. After dinner, the cultural part of the event began. A string quartet took their place on the small stage set up at one end of the hall, and the guests moved freely, some dancing, others chatting, in small groups. David invited Sarah to dance, and she nervously accepted. She hadn't danced in years and had never danced the waltz. Just follow my lead, he whispered, as he guided her to the small makeshift dance floor. And relax. Dancing with David was surprisingly easy. He was a confident lead, anticipating movements, guiding her gently. Sarah let herself be carried away by the music, the movements, the unexpected closeness. You're doing better than you thought, aren't you? He asked, his voice low near her ear. In what way? In every way. The conversations, the people, this world. You belong to it more than you think. Sarah looked into his eyes as they continued dancing. David, can I ask something that's been bothering me all night? Of course. Why did you really bring me here? And don't tell me it was just to have a companion with no ulterior motives. David stopped dancing for a moment, still holding her close. Around them, others continued dancing, but for Sarah it felt as if the world had paused. Because you remind me of who I was before I became just a wealthy businessman, he finally said. Because when you tidy my house, you're not just cleaning, you're creating a home. Because you see beauty where others see only expensive objects. Because he paused as if he had almost revealed more than he intended. Because what? Because you are real, Sarah, and I haven't met real people in my world for a long time. The sincerity of his response left her speechless. They resumed dancing, in silence. But now there was a different tension between them, not uncomfortable, but charged with unspoken possibilities. The music ended, and they slowly parted. At that moment, an elegant blonde woman approached the couple. Sarah recognized her immediately from the photos scattered throughout the mansion. Helen Carter, David's ex-wife. "David, what a surprise to see you here," Helen said, kissing him on the cheek with familiarity. She was tall and slender, with the icy sophistication of someone born with a silver spoon. Her blue eyes scanned Sarah from head to toe in a quick and unabashed appraisal. "Helen," David replied, visibly tense, "I didn't know you were back from Paris. I returned a week ago, and you must be—" She addressed Sarah with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah Johnson," she replied, extending her hand. "Oh," Helen said, shaking the offered hand with less force than would be polite. "David's employee. I've heard about you." The condescending tone was like a bucket of cold water. Sarah felt all her insecurities flooding back at once. Was she really just an employee masquerading as a princess for one night? "Helen," David said, his voice laden with warning. "Oh, David, you don't need to be defensive. I'm sure Sarah knows exactly what her place is." Helen smiled again, the venom masked by elite politeness. Sarah took a deep breath, recalling Helen Carter's lessons on confidence and authenticity. She wasn't going to let that woman belittle her, not after everything she had achieved that night. "You're right, Helen," Sarah said calmly. "I know exactly what my place is. And at this moment, it's here, beside David, being myself, not pretending to be someone I'm not trying to buy respect with inherited money, not needing to belittle others to feel important." The silence that followed was deafening. Helen visibly paled, clearly unaccustomed to being confronted with such elegance and firmness. "Well," Helen finally said, "I see things have changed quite a bit around here." "Yes," David said, looking directly at his ex-wife. "They've changed for the better." Helen walked away without saying goodbye, and Sarah felt her legs wobble slightly from the adrenaline of the confrontation. "Sarah," David said, "you were amazing." "Was I? Because I feel like I've just walked into a war without armor." David laughed, a genuine sound full of admiration. "Helen always had a way of making people feel inferior. In 10 years of marriage, I often felt that way myself. But you didn't just stand your ground. You showed her what true class is." Sarah smiled, feeling a newfound confidence rising within her. Perhaps she really did belong to that world, not because she was born into it, but because she had earned her place through character, intelligence, and authenticity. The rest of the night passed like a dream. Sarah talked with artists about their inspirations, with business people about social projects, with politicians about public policies for women. And with each conversation, she felt more confident, more herself. When the event came to an end and they walked toward the car, Sarah carried more than just memories of a special night. She carried 2 concrete job offers, dozens of new contacts, and most importantly, a new vision of her own possibilities. "Sarah," David said when James opened the car door, "thank you for joining me tonight. You turned a work event into an unforgettable experience." She looked at him, still processing everything that had happened. "David, I need to ask you something." "Of course." "Did you know this would happen? The offers, the contacts, did you plan this?" David hesitated, and in that hesitation Sarah found her answer. "You planned it," she said, more as a statement than a question. "Not in the way you're thinking," he replied quickly. "I didn't arrange anything with anyone, but yes, I hoped people would see in you what I've seen for the past 2 years." Sarah got into the car in silence, processing the revelation. As James drove through the empty streets of the early morning, she looked out the window and reflected on how a single night had completely changed the course of her life. The question now was no longer whether she belonged to that world, but what she would do with all the doors that had opened before her. Chapter 7. The days following the gala passed in a strange mix of euphoria and confusion. Sarah returned to her work routine in the mansion, but everything felt different now. Sarah moved through the same tasks and environments, but with a new awareness of herself. It was as if she had discovered she had wings, yet didn't quite know how to fly. David, for his part, was different too. More attentive, more present, but also more cautious in his interactions. It was as if that night had changed the dynamic between them irreversibly, and both were navigating unknown territory. On the Tuesday following the gala, Sarah was organizing the study on the second floor when she found a forgotten folder on the mahogany desk where David used to work. It was a brown leather folder with documents that had slipped out, clearly abandoned there by distraction. As she tried to reorganize the papers to return them to the folder, her hands froze. The header of the first document read, "Hope Project Foundation for Women's Professional Development," and further down, in bold, she read, "Coordinator Proposal, Sarah Johnson." With her heart racing, Sarah quickly flipped through the other documents. Detailed projects for training courses, partnerships with companies for job placements, implementation timelines, multi-million-dollar budgets. And in all of them, her name appeared as the project's general coordinator. "Sarah?" David's voice startled her. He was at the door of the study, watching her with an expression that mixed guilt and apprehension. "What is this, David?" she asked, raising the folder. Her voice was controlled, but he could sense the tension behind her apparent. "Oh, calm." David entered the study and closed the door behind him. "It's a project I've been developing for a few months. A project that includes my name without consulting me." He approached slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. "Sarah, let me explain. Please explain, because I'm starting to understand that the night of the gala was not what I thought it was." David sighed deeply and sat in one of the chairs in the study. "6 months ago, I started developing the idea for this foundation. My mother always said our family should give back to society, but I never found a cause that truly motivated me." Sarah remained standing, holding the folder, waiting for him to continue. "Until I started observing you, the way you work, how you treat people, how you transformed this home. I began to think about how many women like you are out there, intelligent, dedicated, but without opportunities." "And you decided to make me your guinea pig?" "No." David stood up abruptly. "I decided you would be perfect to lead a project that could change the lives of other women, but I knew that if I simply offered you the position, you would suspect my motivations." Sarah laughed, but there was no joy in the sound. "And shouldn't I be suspicious? The gala was a way to introduce you to the circle that could support the project. People needed to meet you, see your competence, your intelligence." "An audition," Sarah said bitterly. "You used me as if I were an actress auditioning for a role." "That's not it, Sarah. You misunderstood." "Then what was it?" She was starting to get angry, an emotion she rarely allowed to surface. "Explain to me exactly what it was, David." He ran his hand through his hair, a gesture she had learned to recognize as a sign of extreme nervousness. "It was a desperate attempt to create a reason for you to stay in my life." The words hung in the air between them. Sarah blinked several times, as if trying to process what she had heard. "What?" "Sarah, in the last 2 years, you brought something to my life that I didn't know I was missing. This house stopped being just a place where I sleep and became a home. You remind me of who I was before I became just a rich, lonely man." Sarah placed the folder on the table and stepped away from him. "David, you're confusing gratitude with something else." "I'm not confusing anything. I'm in love with you, Sarah. And when I saw you starting to question whether you wanted to continue just as a housekeeper, I panicked. The confession fell like a bomb in the silence of the study. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes wide. "You are... what?" "In love. Completely, hopelessly in love. With the way you sing softly while you work, with the tenderness you show to every object in this home, with the intelligence that shines in your eyes when you think no one is watching, with the strength you show every day, raising your daughter alone." Sarah sat heavily in a chair, feeling her legs weaken. "David, this is impossible. We come from completely different worlds." "They are just circumstances, Sarah. Money, social position, those things are temporary. What I feel for you is real." "And what do you think I feel?" The question came out harsher than she intended. David looked at her with total vulnerability. "I don't know. I hope it's something, because I saw how you looked at me at the gala. I saw how we danced together. I felt there was something." Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden where they had had coffee that morning, which now seemed to have happened months ago. "David, even if there was something, it could never work." "Why?" "Because you are my employer, because there is a power imbalance between us that would make any relationship problematic, because your family, your friends, your world would never truly accept me. Sarah, you saw how people reacted to you on the night of the gala. They reacted to a dressed-up version of me, wearing clothes that cost more than I earn in 3 months. That's not real, David." He stepped closer to her by the window. "What you wore didn't matter. It was you who was impressing people. Your intelligence, your authenticity, your natural elegance." Sarah turned to face him. For the first time she noticed details she had overlooked before, how his eyes lit up when he spoke about the social project, how his hands gestured when he was excited, how there was a deep sadness behind the wealth and apparent success. "And Helen, your ex-wife, who clearly wants to reconcile." David grimaced. "Helen is the past. We divorced 3 years ago because we realized we had absolutely nothing in common besides our social class. She returned from Paris because she heard about the success of my business and thought it would be a good time to try for a reconciliation. And the foundation project, was it real or just an excuse?" "It's completely real. I've already invested $2 million in the initial structure. With or without you, Sarah, the project will happen, but it would be infinitely better with you leading." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts. "I need time to think about all this." "How much time?" "I don't know. It's a lot to process." David nodded, though frustration was evident on his face. "Sarah, I just want you to know one thing. Regardless of what you decide about us, you will always have your job here, and the offer to lead the foundation still stands." "Thank you," she said softly. "And Sarah?" "Yes? I'm sorry for not being honest from the start. You deserve to know the truth." That night, Sarah arrived home, mentally exhausted. Emily immediately noticed that something was wrong. "Mom, you look like you've seen a ghost," the girl said as they had dinner. "Sometimes, my love, life presents us with very difficult choices," Sarah replied, absent-mindedly stirring the rice on her plate. "About that important event?" Sarah looked at her daughter, once again impressed by her perception. "About many things that changed after that event." "Good changes or bad?" "I don't know yet, Emily. I still don't know." After her daughter went to bed, Sarah sat on the small balcony of the apartment, just as she had done the night she received the golden invitation. New York stretched out before her, the same metropolis of infinite possibilities, but now some of those possibilities had form and name, a new career, a new life, and a man who claimed to be in love with her. The question was, what did she really want? And more importantly, what was she willing to risk to get it? The phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Jessica, the wife of the hospital owner. "Sarah, dear, I was thinking about our conversation at the gala. How about we have lunch tomorrow to discuss the hospital proposal in more detail? Sarah looked at the phone, then at the city below. The pieces of her future were moving, but she still didn't know what final shape they would take. Of course, Miss Jessica, it would be a pleasure, because perhaps it was time to discover what other doors might open before deciding which one to enter. Chapter 8. The restaurant Terrazza Italia occupied the top of one of New York's most iconic buildings, offering a panoramic view of the metropolis. Sarah had never been to such a sophisticated place for lunch. The elegant atmosphere, with tables arranged by the huge windows, created a feeling of floating above the city. Jessica was waiting for her at a table near the window, wearing a light blue linen outfit that perfectly complemented her grey hair. "Sarah, it's so good to see you again," Jessica smiled, standing up to kiss her on the cheek. "You look lovely. There's something different about you since the gala." Sarah sat down, taking in the stunning view. Below, New York stretched infinitely, a sea of buildings, streets, lives intertwining in a complex urban dance. "I think some experiences mark us more than we expect," she replied, thinking about everything that had happened in the past few days. "Exactly, and that's what I want to talk to you about," Jessica said, opening the menu. "But first, let's order something delicious. Trust me, the grilled salmon with lemon risotto here is exceptional." During the appetizer, an arugula salad with pears and walnuts that Sarah had never imagined could be so tasty, Jessica shared the challenges they faced at the hospital. "Our biggest problem isn't technical, Sarah. We have state-of-the-art equipment, excellent doctors, modern facilities. But we've lost something along the way. The humanization of care," she explained, gesturing with her fork. "Especially with the elderly. Many come to the hospital not only physically ill, but also emotionally fragile." Sarah nodded, remembering the month she spent caring for Jessica's mother-in-law. Ms. Margaret always said that the worst part of illness wasn't the physical pain, but the feeling of becoming invisible to the world. Exactly. And it's this sensitivity that we need to incorporate into our institutional care. We want to create a pilot program in the geriatric sector, training staff, developing protocols for humanized care, creating more welcoming spaces. The main course arrived, and Sarah was once again surprised by the sophistication of the presentation. The salmon was perfectly grilled, and the creamy risotto had a delicate flavor that paired perfectly with the fish. "And you want me to lead this project?" Sarah asked, still processing the magnitude of the proposal. "We want you to develop, implement and coordinate the entire program. You would be the Director of Geriatric Care Humanization, a new position created specifically for you." Sarah nearly choked on the white wine that Jessica had chosen to accompany the lunch. "Jessica, I don't have the academic background for such a position. I just have a high school diploma and practical experience." "Sarah, you cared for my mother-in-law during the last 6 months of her life, a woman who had become aggressive, confused, resistant to any kind of care. In 2 weeks with you, she was smiling again, talking, showing affection for her family." Jessica leaned forward, emphasizing each word. "That can't be learned in college, my dear. That's a gift." The words touched Sarah deeply. For years she had belittled herself for not having university degrees, for working as a housekeeper while others her age had established careers. "Moreover," Jessica continued, "part of the project would include your formal training, partnerships with universities, specialization courses, participation in conferences. You would have all the necessary support to grow professionally." Sarah looked out the window, watching the city below. People walked. As they walked along the sidewalks like ants, each with their own ambitions, fears and dreams, how many of them were, at that moment, facing decisions that could completely change their lives? What would my salary be? She asked, trying to be practical. $8,000 to start, with an increase to $12,000 after 6 months when the project is fully implemented. Comprehensive health plan? For you and your daughter, meal vouchers, and an annual budget of $15,000 for your professional development. Sarah felt her head spin slightly. It was almost 4 times what she earned working for David. It would be real financial independence, the possibility of giving a better life to Emily, of feeling fulfilled professionally. When would you need an answer? Ideally, by the end of this week. The project has been approved by the hospital board. We already have allocated funds. We just need the right person to lead it. After dessert, a chocolate molten cake that melted. In her mouth, Jessica leaned in again. Sarah, can I give you some advice as an older woman? Of course. Sometimes the best opportunities come when we are not looking for them. But when they do, you need to have the courage to seize them. You have a special talent for caring for people. It would be a waste not to use that talent to impact hundreds of lives. Walking back to the subway station, Sarah felt torn between excitement and anxiety. The hospital's proposal was tempting. It represented everything she had always dreamed of professionally, but it would also mean leaving David, the mansion that had become familiar, and facing the unknown. Arriving home in the late afternoon, she found Emily doing homework at the kitchen table, with Mrs. Thompson patiently supervising. "Mom, how was your important lunch?" Emily asked, running to hug her. "It was revealing," Sarah replied, hugging her daughter. "Emily, how would you feel if our life changed quite a bit?" The girl looked at her with her big, curious eyes. "What kind of change?" "If I changed jobs, earned more money, maybe we could move to a bigger apartment. You could take those dance classes you've always wanted." "That would be amazing, but would you be happy in the new job?" Her daughter's question went straight to the point. Sarah realized she had spent so much time worrying about financial stability that she had almost forgotten to question whether she would be happy. "I think so, sweetheart. It would be a job helping sick people feel better." "Then you should accept," Emily declared, with the simple wisdom of children. "Money is important, but being happy is even more important." That night, Sarah took a long time to fall asleep. Her mind alternated between the possibilities that were opening up, the hospital, David's foundation, even the informal proposal from the mayor, and the emotional complications that each choice would bring. At 2 in the morning, she gave up trying to sleep and went to the kitchen to make some tea. Sitting at the small table where they had all their meals, she took a piece of paper and began to write down the pros and cons of each option. Hospital, financial independence, own career, use of her natural talents, stability. Cons, leaving her comfort zone, big responsibilities, fear of not managing. David's foundation, even higher salary, inspiring project, work with social impact. Cons, mixing personal and professional life, dependence on David, emotional complications, staying as she was, security, known routine, no pressures. Cons, professional stagnation, maintaining financial dependence, wasting opportunities. When she finished the list, one thing became clear. Continuing as she was no longer a real option. Something had changed irreversibly within her that night of the gala. She had discovered that she was capable of more than she had imagined, and it would be impossible to pretend that this discovery hadn't happened. The question now was, which path to choose? The phone rang, startling her. Who would call at this hour? The display showed David's number. "Sarah, sorry to call so late, but there's something I need to tell you, and I couldn't wait until tomorrow." His voice was tense, different. "What happened?" "I received a call from Jessica this afternoon. She told me about the hospital's proposal." Sarah felt her heart race. "And?" And I want you to know that regardless of what you decide, you have my full support. If you choose the hospital, I will write a recommendation letter that will open any door. If you choose the foundation, it will be the most important partnership of my life." There was a long silence between them. "David, why are you telling me this?" "Because I realized something today. My fear of losing you was making me try to control you. And that is exactly the opposite of what you deserve. You deserve all the opportunities in the world, and you deserve to make your choices freely." Sarah felt her eyes welling up. "Thank you for saying that." "Sarah?" "Yes?" "Whatever your decision, know that you transform my life, and I will always be grateful for that." When she hung up the phone, Sarah knew her choice was made. Not yet about which job to accept, but about something more fundamental. She would not choose based on fear, but on the courage to build the life she truly wanted. And for the first time in years, she had clarity about what kind of life that was. Chapter 9. The following Thursday, Sarah was back at the mansion in the Upper East Side, but this time not to work. She had asked to talk to David about her decision, and he welcomed her in the same garden where everything had begun, with the wrought iron table set for afternoon coffee. The aroma of white roses scented the air, and the sound of the fountain created an almost ceremonial atmosphere for what would probably be the most important conversation of their lives. "I've decided to accept the hospital's proposal," Sarah said directly, without beating around the bush. She had learned that clear honesty, even when painful, was always the best approach. David nodded slowly, trying to hide the disappointment he clearly felt. "It's the right choice for you," he said, stirring the sugar in his coffee with precise movements. "Jessica called me yesterday to confirm some details of the reference I will write. You will start as the first director of humanization who—" "The hospital has already had its share," Sarah observed her elegant hands, the way he maintained his posture, even though he was clearly shaken by the news. "David, this isn't about rejecting you or the foundation. It's about choosing the path that will truly allow me to grow." "I completely understand," he replied, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "In fact, I admire your courage. It would be much easier to accept my proposal. Higher salary, familiar environment, known people, but you chose the real challenge." There was a contemplative silence between them, filled only by the murmur of the fountain and the distant sounds of traffic on the street. "And what about what you told me about your feelings?" Sarah asked, finally addressing the elephant in the room. David smiled sadly. "My feelings remain the same, Sarah. But I've come to understand that true love means wanting the best for the person, not trying to keep them close for our own comfort." Sarah felt her chest tighten. In recent weeks, she had spent sleepless nights, thinking about David, about what she felt for him, about the possibilities that existed between them. And she had come to a conclusion that surprised her. "David, can I confess something to you?" "Of course. I've also developed feelings for you, deeper than I thought possible." He looked at her in surprise, clearly not expecting this revelation. "So why?" "Because we need to discover who we are individually before we know who we can be together," Sarah explained, carefully choosing her words. "If I stayed now, there would always be the doubt. Am I here for love or for convenience? For you or for security?" David leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "And do you think that with time this doubt would clarify?" "I think if we are truly meant for each other, our paths will cross again when we are both complete as individuals," Sarah replied. "And if we're not, at least we'll know we tried in the right way." The depth of her response seemed to hit David in an unexpected way. He fell silent for several minutes, processing the words. "Sarah, you are an extraordinary woman, and you are right. True love requires two complete people, not two halves trying to complete each other. They spent the next 2 hours discussing the transition. David had prepared a detailed recommendation letter, highlighting not only Sarah's work ethic, but also her emotional intelligence, leadership ability, and natural organizational skills. He also offered to be a personal reference whenever she needed. "The foundation will continue," David said, as the conversation was drawing to a close. "I will find someone else to coordinate it, but it will always be in your honor, because you showed me that it is possible to do business with heart." Sarah felt tears, threatening, but she held them back. "Thank you, David, for everything, for showing me that I was capable of more than I imagined. Thank you for reminding me of who I really am." They stood up simultaneously, and for a moment they stood still, looking at each other. There was so much that could be said, so much that would remain unsaid. David stepped closer and gently embraced her. Sarah reciprocated, inhaling his familiar scent, memorizing the feeling of security that his arms provided. "If you ever need anything," he began. "I know where to find you," she finished, smiling, through the tears that finally began to fall. 2 weeks later, Sarah was on her first day of work at St. Raphael Hospital. Wearing a navy professional suit she had bought with part of the money from the charity gala, she walked through the clean, quiet corridors, observing the dynamics of the place that would be her new work environment. Her office was on the 4th floor, with a new sign on the door, "Department of Humanization, Sarah A. Johnson." It was small, but it had a window overlooking an inner garden where patients and families often walked during the day. Jessica welcomed her personally, introducing her to the nursing staff, doctors, and administrators who would work directly with her project. Sarah developed an initial protocol based on her practical experience, Jessica explained during the introduction meeting, "but we want everyone to contribute ideas and feedback. This is a collaborative project." During the first weeks, Sarah immersed herself completely in the new job. She visited elderly patients, talked to families, observed the dynamics between staff and patients. Gradually, she began to implement small changes: ambient music in the rooms during specific hours, staff training on empathetic communication, creating more welcoming common areas. Emily quickly adapted to the changes in their lives. With the new salary, Sarah was able to enroll her in a small but excellent private school where the girl could finally take the dance classes she had always dreamed of. They moved to a larger apartment in the Upper West Side with 2 bedrooms and a small service area where Sarah finally had space for her own washing machine. "Mom, you really are happy now," Emily observed one night as they dined at the new table in the spacious kitchen. "I am, my love, very happy. And do you miss Mr. David?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Emily had briefly met David when he came to pick up some work documents that Sarah had forgotten at the old apartment. "I do," Sarah admitted. "But sometimes missing someone is a sign that that person was important to us. Does he miss you too?" Sarah smiled at her daughter's insight. "I think so. Then you can meet from time to time, right? As friends?" The simplicity of the suggestion made Sarah laugh. "Maybe, my love, maybe." 3 months later, Sarah was presenting the first results of her project. At a hospital administration conference, she had overcome her initial nervousness about public speaking and discovered that she had a natural ease for communication when it came to something she was passionate about. Patient satisfaction rates increased by 40% in 3 months, she explained to an audience of hospital administrators, but more importantly, the average length of stay decreased by 15% because emotionally cared-for patients recover more quickly. In the audience, as she knew, David was watching the presentation. He had come to the conference to explore partnerships for his foundation and was genuinely surprised to see Sarah's name on the agenda. watching her speak confidently about humanization protocols, gesturing enthusiastically while explaining results, and smiling radiantly as she received questions from the audience. David felt a mix of pride and nostalgia that almost made him approach her. But he didn't. He had learned that loving someone sometimes means just cheering for their happiness from a distance. After the presentation, Sarah was surrounded by other professionals interested in implementing similar projects. Invitations for consulting, partnership proposals, even better job offers. Her career was taking off in a way she had never imagined. Walking to the parking lot after the event, Sarah felt fulfilled in a completely new way. It wasn't just professional satisfaction, but the certainty that she had found her purpose, caring for people in their most vulnerable forms, making a difference in lives that needed compassion. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a number she recognized immediately, even though she hadn't seen it in months. "I saw your presentation today. Extraordinary as always. Congratulations on the well-deserved success. David." Sarah stared at the message for a long moment, feeling her heart race slightly. She typed and deleted several responses before settling on a simple, "Thank you. I hope your foundation is thriving as well." The reply came almost immediately. "It is. And you were right. Sometimes we need to meet ourselves first, before we can meet others. When you feel ready, I would love to learn about the work you inspired." Sarah smiled, putting her phone in her bag. It might still be early, but for the first time since making her decision, she felt that the future could hold more positive surprises. And this time, she would be ready for them, as a complete woman, confident in herself and her worth. Chapter 10. A year and 2 months after the charity gala, Sarah found herself once again in front of the mirror, but this time in her own apartment in the Upper West Side. The dress she wore was gold, elegant but not ostentatious, purchased with her own money, an achievement that still moved her. Her hair, now cut into a modern long bob, shone with subtle highlights she had learned to maintain. But the biggest difference was in her eyes. There was a serene confidence that came from someone who had discovered her place in the world. "Mom, you look beautiful," said Emily, now 9 years old, watching her from the bedroom door. The girl had visibly grown during that time, not just physically, but in maturity. Dance classes had given her an elegant posture, and the new school had stimulated her natural intelligence. "Thank you, sweetheart. Are you sure you don't mind staying with Mrs. Thompson tonight?" "Mom, it's Mr. David's 2nd anniversary of the Hope Foundation. You have to go. It's about your work too, right?" Sarah smiled. Emily was right, partly. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks ago on expensive paper with gold lettering for the 2nd charity gala of the Hope Foundation. But in the accompanying letter, handwritten by David, there was something more personal. "Sarah, the foundation has served 347 women in 18 months. 5 of them have started their own businesses, 2 have graduated from college, and all have found dignity and hope. None of this would have been possible without your inspiration. It would be an honor to have you present at the celebration of this work that began by observing your dedication. With admiration and affection, David." During that year, Sarah had transformed into one of the leading references in hospital humanization in New York. Her work at St. Raphael Hospital had expanded. She was now coordinating a program serving 3 hospitals in the network, training nursing teams in other institutions, and had just received an offer to write a book about her humanized care methodology. Most importantly, she had found peace with herself. The doubts about her worth, her place in the world, her abilities, all had gradually dissolved through real achievements, deserved recognition, and most importantly, through the positive impact she saw daily in her work. The Metropolitan Opera House was even more stunning than the previous year. The same white orchids perfumed the environment, but this time Sarah observed them without intimidation, only with aesthetic appreciation. She was no longer the nervous companion. She was a respected professional, invited on her own merit. "Sarah," Jessica approached as soon as she entered, kissing her on the cheek with genuine affection. "What a joy to see you here. How's the book coming along?" "Halfway through the first chapter and terrifying myself," Sarah laughed. "I still can't believe a serious publisher wants to publish my ideas." "Your ideas have changed the lives of hundreds of people. Dear, it's time for the world to know them." Sarah mingled in the ballroom, greeting acquaintances she had made the previous year, being introduced to new contacts. The difference was noticeable. People sought her out, wanting to hear her opinions on humanization in healthcare, extending invitations for lectures and consulting. She had become someone important on her own merit. It was during a conversation with the state health secretary that she saw him for the first time that night. David was across the ballroom, talking with a group of businessmen, but his eyes found hers through the crowd. He smiled, a genuine smile full of pride, and waved discreetly. Sarah returned the gesture, feeling a mix of nostalgia and gratitude. He looked slimmer, with slightly graying hair at the temples, but there was something different about his posture, a lightness she didn't remember seeing before. He wore an impeccable tuxedo, but he didn't seem to be playing a role. He seemed comfortable with himself. During dinner, Sarah was seated at the main table next to the mayor and his wife. The irony didn't go unnoticed. A year earlier, she had been there as David's companion. Now she was, as the honored guest by her own merits. "Sarah," said Mayor Smith during the entrance, "my wife won't stop talking about the program you implemented at St. Raphael Hospital. We're thinking of proposing something similar for the municipal public network." "It would be an honor to participate in that discussion, Mayor," Sarah replied, delicately cutting her grilled salmon. "And there are rumors that you are being considered for a national position in Washington." Sarah smiled diplomatically. It was true. She had received inquiries to coordinate a national program for hospital humanization, but she had not yet made a decision. After dinner, when the guests spread out into the hall for the cultural part of the event, David finally approached her. "Sarah," he said, and there was something different in his voice, more mature, more serene. "You look radiant." "Thank you, David. You look good too. Different." "Different how?" "More relaxed. Like you found something you were looking for." David smiled. "Maybe I have, or maybe I stopped looking in the wrong place." They walked together to one of the side balconies of the theatre, where the sound of the party became softer, allowing them to converse more privately. New York stretched. Out before them, the city lights creating a shimmering cloak under the night sky. "Do you remember the first time we were here?" David asked, leaning against the railing. "How could I forget? I was terrified, trying to pretend I knew what I was doing. And now," Sarah thought for a moment, "now I know exactly what I'm doing, and I don't need to pretend anything." "That's what I admire about you, Sarah. You've always been authentic, even when you thought you weren't enough." They shared a comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the city below. "How's the foundation?" Sarah asked. "Better than I imagined. We hired an exceptional coordinator, Lisa Thompson, you must know her, psychologist specializing in women's empowerment. She brought a perspective I could never have alone." Sarah nodded. She knew Lisa by reputation, a brilliant woman committed to social causes. "And you? Are you happy with the changes in your life?" "More than I thought possible," Sarah replied honestly. "Sometimes I wake up in the morning and still can't believe this is my life." "And Washington, will you accept the proposal?" Sarah looked at him surprised. "How did you know?" "New York is big, but the circle, of people involved in health policy is small, David smiled. Besides, anyone with half a brain would want you leading a national project. I'm still thinking. It's an incredible opportunity, but it would mean leaving everything I've built here. Emily would have to change schools again. I would have to start over in a completely new environment. David turned to face her completely. Sarah, can I give you some advice? As someone who deeply admires you and wants the best for you? She nodded. Don't make decisions based on fear. You've already proven you can adapt, grow, and conquer any challenge, and an opportunity like this may not come again. That's what Emily said, Sarah laughed. My 9-year-old daughter has more courage than I do sometimes. Children haven't learned to be afraid of flying yet. They were interrupted by the arrival of Helen, David's ex-wife. She was even more elegant than the previous year, wearing a black dress that accentuated her slim silhouette and jewelry that probably cost more than a popular car. David, Sarah, she greeted with a frosty politeness. What a coincidence to find you here talking again. Helen, David replied, his voice neutral. How was Paris? Stimulating, but I've decided to return permanently to New York. There are so many opportunities here, she said, looking significantly at David. Sarah immediately sensed the tension in the air. Helen had not given up on rekindling things with David, and her presence there was no coincidence. Well, I'll leave you to talk, Sarah said, starting to walk away. Sarah, you don't have to go, David said quickly. Actually, I need to greet some people, she replied diplomatically. It was a pleasure to see you both. Walking back to the main hall, Sarah reflected on the interaction. 2 years ago, that situation would have left her insecure, questioning her place, feeling inferior. Now it simply left her indifferent. She had built her own life, her own successes, her own relationships. She was not emotionally dependent on David or anyone else. During the next 2 hours, Sarah spoke with dozens of people, received invitations to speak, exchanged cards with potential professional partners. When the event came to an end, she felt energized instead of exhausted, a sign that she was truly in her element. As she walked toward the exit, David caught up with her. Sarah, can I walk you? To your car? Of course. They walked in silence down the marble stairs, passing other guests saying their goodbyes in small groups. Helen wants to get back together, David said when they reached the sidewalk. I figured, and I said no. Sarah looked at him, surprised by his frankness. Why? David stopped walking and turned to face her. Because I discovered I can no longer be with someone just for convenience or familiarity. Because I learned that I prefer to be alone than to be with the wrong person. And because, he hesitated, because I'm still in love with a woman who taught me that true love sometimes means letting the person fly free. Sarah felt her heart racing. David, I'm not asking for anything, Sarah. I'm not proposing anything. Just being honest about my feelings. You transformed my life, taught me to be a better person. And no matter what happens between us, I will always be grateful for that. Sarah looked at him, really looked. She saw the man he had become, not just the wealthy businessman she had known 2 years before. There was depth in his eyes, humility in his posture, an authenticity that hadn't existed in the past. David, can I confess something to you? Of course. I also still have feelings for you. Perhaps deeper now than I did before. David's face lit up with surprise and hope. Then why is there still a but in your voice? Sarah smiled at his insight. Because I still don't know what I'm going to do about Washington, D.C., and because if we're going to try something, it has to be for the right reasons. 2 whole people choosing to be together, not 2 people needing each other. I completely understand. Do you really? Sarah, I've waited 2 years to have this conversation. I can wait as long as it takes for you to make your decisions." She moved closer to him and impulsively kissed him lightly on the cheek. "Thank you for understanding me, and for becoming the man you are now." When Sarah got home, she found Emily still awake, pretending to read in bed. "So, Mum, how was it?" "It was revealing," Sarah replied, sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed. "Was Mr. David there?" "He was." "And did you talk?" "We talked." Emily looked at her with her usual insight. "He still likes you." "How do you know?" "By the way you're smiling. It's the same smile you have when you really like something, but are afraid to admit it." Sarah laughed, hugging her daughter. "You're very smart for a 9-year-old. Are you going to accept the job in Washington, D.C.? The question came without warning, straight to the point. "I haven't decided yet, my love." "Can I give you my opinion?" "Of course." "I think you should accept it. Not because I want to move to Washington, D.C. Actually, I like it here, but because you've always taught me that we should be brave and pursue our dreams." Sarah looked at her daughter, once again impressed by her maturity. "What if it's really hard? Then we'll find out we're stronger than we thought, just like when we moved from the old house, just like when you changed jobs." That night, Sarah stayed up late on the apartment balcony, looking at the lights of New York. The city that had been the backdrop for so many transformations in her life stretched out before her like a map of possibilities. There were two important decisions to make: the offer from Washington, D.C., and a question of David. And for the first time, she felt completely capable of making both based not on fear or need, but on courage and the desire to build the best version of her life. Because Sarah Johnson had learned that Cinderellas don't need princes to transform their lives. They just need to discover that they have always had the power of transformation within themselves. And this discovery, more than any evening gown or glass slipper, had been her true transformation.